This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to update and upgrade our Feather the Redeemed EDH deck. Thank you for joining us for another edition of the Up and Up series. Today we are updating and upgrading Feather the Redeemed, one of your favorite MTG Burgeoning EDH decks. We got about a half dozen cards going in, which means a half dozen cards are coming out. But before we start wheeling and dealing, let me take a moment to let you know that down in the description of this video, you can find the link to this build's deck tech. You can also find a link to the up-to-the-minute deck list for this build as well, in addition to this build's video primer series. All right, Feather, what do you got in store for us today? Well, it might be a little case of a hankering for some double mint gum. Why is that? Well, the first card going in, well, will you look at that? It's a new version of our commander. We have Feather Radiant Arbiter. Very, very nice for the exact same mana value of 1 red mana and 2 white mana. A reverse of the power toughness, though. Instead of her being the original 3/4, she's up to 4/3, and they decided to throw lifelink on next to the flying. Very, very nice here. Not going to change the commander, but she'll have a spot in the 99, that's for sure. Whenever we cast a non-creature spell that targets only Feather Radiant Arbiter, we may choose any number of other creatures that spell could target and pay 2 generic mana for each of those creatures. If we do, for each of those creatures, we copy that spell, and that copy targets that creature. Very, very nice here, particularly in a build that wants to sling spells like nobody's business. If original Feather is in our command zone, languishing perhaps over some, inflated commander tax, well, it's nice to know that this Feather could come down and do a somewhat admirable job of what original Feather could do, not so much by replenishing our hand with cards from all of the Cantrip spells and the exile effect, but still, all of those spells that we're casting, we will be able to use a pseudo OG Feather ability on this version of our commander. All right, with the Radiant Arbiter going in, it's going to replace one of the spells in this deck that seems like it's a good idea to include, but you know what? In actual gameplay, it's one that kind of just sits in the hand and gathers dust. At least it does for me. You can let me know your thoughts about us taking this card out in the comment section below, which is Soul's Fire. It has an instant for 2 and 1 red mana, and target creature we control in play deals damage equal to its power to any target. The problem with Soul's Fire, it doesn't draw us any cards. It's 2 and a red mana, where the vast majority of our instants are either 1 or 2 mana, including some of the sorceries that may be in this build as well. We're trying to head more for an all-instant theme so that we can cast as many around the table as possible. And Soul's Fire it's a decent spell if you have a biggin on your side of the battlefield. Outside of a couple of niche power-increasing cards in the 99 of this build, we're not really getting the biggest bang for this card's direct damage buck. So I think replacing a spell like this with a mana value of 3, with a version of Feather over there with the same mana value of 3, this is 2 and 1 red, where that is 1 red and 2 white, I think we're going to overall impact the battlefield more, and I'm pretty certain that we're going to, in the long haul, get greater value out of the Radiant Arbiter than we would Soul's Fire. All right, card number 2 going in. All right, here we go. You can tell by that, it looks like it's an old one. I'm pretty sure it is. Got a smudge there. It's all worn out in the back. Well, you were right. We're going all the way back to the time of Ice Age to include a copy of Lightning Blow. Here we have an instant for 1 and 1 white mana. There's that aforementioned 2 mana value we were talking about before. Target creature gains first strike until end of turn, and then we draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Having to wait until the next turn's upkeep is, let's face it, it's a bit of a pain. It's a little bit of a barrier to the immediate gratification of what a Boros spell-slinging deck wants to be. But you know what? These cards don't come, they don't just grow on trees, so we're going to take what we have and we're going to jam this baby in there. It is a cantrip spell. We can get it back with OG Feather on our side of the battlefield. First Strike is a nice little combat chicanery move as well. It's still card advantage. We're getting cards into our hand, and if Feather is on our side of the battlefield, we're going to get this card back in our hand as well. All right, with a cantrip spell going into the 99, it's going to replace Seize the Day. Now, here is one of those aforementioned sorcery spells, similar to Soul's Fire, although Soul's Fire is an instant, with a mana value that's just a little too hefty for what we want to do in this build. Our primary goal here in this Feather build is to cast as many instants throughout our opponent's turns during a round of turns, gain an unseen amount of resources, accelerate our side of the battlefield, and then just swoop in for a game-winning turn. Seize the Day in a different type of build may be a better card than it is here. For 3 and 1 red mana at sorcery speed, we get to untap target creature, and then after this main phase, there is an additional combat phase followed by an additional main phase, and we could flash this back from our graveyard for 2 and 1 red mana. I do believe that the possibility exists that we could target Feather with this spell if we were able to jack her power up to threatening levels of commander damage. However, as noted earlier in this video, we don't have as many spells in the 99 of this build to jack up Feather, making Seize the Day a prime candidate to yield to the overall spell-slinging theme of this deck, which is, let's cast them instants and draw them cards. All right, card number 3 going in, and that is going to be, it is another instant, and here we have another one of those instants with a mana value of 1 or 2. This time it is Fight as 1. We get to cast this spell and we can choose one or both. Either target human creature we control gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until end of turn, or target non-human creature we control gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible until end of turn. As we shift to the left a little bit, yes, Feather is only an angel, so the human part of her is not going to be targeted with Fight as 1. I'm sorry, so the human part of Fight as 1 is not going to target Feather the Redeemed. However, if you check out the deck list of this build, you'll note that we do have a few humans that could be worth preserving if a board wipe were to come down. Note that this is not a cantrip spell. However, with Feather on our side of the battlefield and or another, I'm sorry, not and or, but if we also had a human on our side of the battlefield too, we can pay the 1 mana at instant speed, we can give Feather and that human indestructible, and then get this card back to delay the demise of our commander and whoever her companion on the battlefield is. All right, with Fight as 1 going into the 99 of this build, it is going to replace Sheltering Light. Here we have a straight-up swap. 1 white mana for an instant for 1 white mana for an instant. Sheltering Light gave target creature indestructible until end of turn, and then with the benefit of scrying 1. For the purposes of this build, however, we're still giving Feather indestructible because target non-human creature we control gets +1/+1 and gains indestructible. Losing the scry 1, it's not a necessary component to this deck. I mean, we're drawing cards after cards after cards after cards. Having the scry ability, that might be more valuable in a deck that prioritizes the quality of cards that are coming from the top of it. Here, it's all about quantity, and with the many, many words that are littering the text box of Fight as 1, it's going to trump what Sheltering Light did, and that's why it is on the outs. All right, card number 4 going in. Oh, and we're going to, look at that. We are spoiling card number 5. So if you know what the backside is and you know what the front side is, but before we get to card number 5, we have to talk about card number 4, and that is Decanter of Endless Water. Here we have an artifacts buff for 3 generic mana. It gives us no maximum hand size. That has a nice little sub-theme woven through this deck, because all of those cards that we continuously draw based upon all of the activated and triggered abilities in this build, including that of our commanders, we do not want to discard those cards at the end of our turn. Having no maximum hand size allows us to have allows us to have a hand that, let's face it, could become library size. And in addition, we can tap this to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. All right, so generally we want to have a mana rock that's 2 mana value, because let's face it, 3 is a little bit of an investment. That's in most EDH builds, of course. However, as you'll note, most of our instant spells are 1 or 2 mana, so having that colored mana is going to make a lot more of a difference. And including another way in which to have no maximum hand size, well, that's just going to help this deck in the long run as well. Paying the 1 extra generic mana for an improvement in the mana of this spell, well, that just makes Thought Vessel a little more expendable. Thought Vessel is what Decanter of Endless Water is, except for the 1 additional generic mana and that spell's mana value. We get to tap for 1 mana of any color versus 1 colorless mana. All right, the next card going in, yep, you know it's if it's Siriri Glacier on the backside, then you know it's Siriri Shelter on the front side. Another instant with that prime mana value of 1 and 1 white mana. Target creature we control gains protection from the color of our choice until end of turn. This will help to prevent almost all forms of spot removal, outside of the removal spell having something like Split Second, or maybe it's what's that one instant for 7 generic mana? I can't remember what it's called. That exiles target permanent, but it's colorless. Anyways, this helps to really shut down spot removal, helps to protect Feather, and if we already have a fistful of protection in our hand, well, then we can just play it for the backside, which is a land. It does come into play tapped, which, will slow our tempo a little bit, but we can tap it for 1 white mana. All right, so Siriri Shelter gives us another way to protect our commander and the potential to add a land. With that card going in, it just makes sense that we take out a basic Plains, because if needed in the early parts of the game, we can just put Siriri Shelter's backside into play and not miss a beat, outside of it coming into play tapped, of course. All right, MTG BC, our last card going in, and it is, it's Castle Emth. As Castle Emth comes into play tapped, unless we control a mountain, that should not be a problem in this type of build because we've got an awful lot of mountains. We can tap this bad boy to add a red mana to our mana pool, or we can pay 1 and 2 red and tap it to give creatures we control +1/+0. Note that this Feather build does have a nice little sub-theme of creature token production, which, including Castle Emth, may act as a potential win condition. With this land going into the build that taps for a red mana, I think you can see where the trend is here, it seems reasonable to replace a basic mountain. We're getting the same red mana, it most likely will come into play untapped, except we get the additional advantage of that activated ability, which could be a potential game winner. All right, there you have it, MTG BC. We got a half dozen more cards going into Feather. You let me know your thoughts about these changes in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.